Hello, my name is Jean-Jacques Nantel. If nobody fully understands how the financial system works, it's because financiers made it so complicated that even the governments would be unable to understand what they are doing. The economic system they put in place has been so efficient and has worked for so long that according to a recent Oxfam report, the 85 richest people on the planet own as much as the bottom half of mankind. Adam Smith, the great economist, once wrote that the invisible hand of the market could solve all the problems in a free economy. In real life, however, that invisible hand has been replaced by the very real hands of bankers and speculators who become rich by stealing rather than by producing something useful. If industrial geniuses like Henry Ford, Bill Gates, or Elon Musk may have produced 10 or 20% of everything they own, it is obvious that most of the 85 billionaires we're talking about don't deserve what they have, especially those who inherited their fortune. It is, of course, the defects of capitalism that made possible such a ridiculous accumulation of wealth. Among those defects, the most important is the fact that almost everything in that system has very short-term objectives. Workers think about their next paycheck, a businessman thinks about their year-end profits, and politicians think about the next election. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, that defect was indeed an advantage because it allowed everybody to adapt very quickly to a world where change was the only permanent thing. In the modern world, however, mankind can no longer afford to think that way because what used to be our long-term problems have become very pressing short-term problems. Just think about China, where mass industrialization is poisoning the population it was supposed to enrich. Nowadays, even multinationals don't care about the future, even if it is their obvious interest to make the system as permanent as possible. If it is like that, it is because multinationals are controlled by administrators who don't own them and who are at the helm of their companies for very few years. As a result, those administrators tend to take bad decisions that will increase their year-end bonuses rather than painful decisions that would serve the long-term interests of their companies. Another important defect of the present system is the fact that we don't have a world government whose job would be to control and regulate what is happening at the international level. At the international level, there are no real laws and no real police. Adam Smith himself wrote that a totally unregulated economy was not a free economy because of the natural tendency of the rich and powerful people to collude and to create cartels to keep prices artificially high. That defect of the present system is precisely why multinationals like so much globalization. To maximize their profits, multinationals often play one country against all the others. For instance, if they want to reduce their tax burden, they can send all the raw materials they buy in Africa, for example, through a country where taxation is low and where they boost artificially their prices before re-exporting them in countries with high taxation. With that simple trick, they keep most of their profits at the international level or in countries where taxation and regulation are almost non-existent. In fact, those raw materials don't even have to pass through a transit country, since the whole operation can be made official with documents signed in advance by corrupt civil servants. Life is even easier for multinationals working in the financial sector, since they can move at the speed of light an infinite quantity of weightless and immaterial financial products through an untraceable network of tax havens. This is the reason why the world's largest banks all have branches in multiple tax havens or in strategic countries like Switzerland, which is located in the middle of Europe. In those countries, tax rates are low, bank secrecy is guaranteed, and bankers are let totally free to organize international schemes that are considered criminal in normal countries. In normal countries, bankers often had an even better deal because many governments gave them the right to create and administer central banks whose main tasks are to print the national currency and to control the interest rates. Imagine with that system, private unelected bankers whose goal is to make as much money as they can have the power to decide the value of the money and in fact of everything owned by the citizens of a country. The main reason why governments accepted to create central banks that would remain out of their control was that they wanted experts, not amateurs, to take care of that essential part of their national economies. In a word, the amateurs who controlled the state tried to keep their jobs by creating an artificial economic stability. Their agreement with the bankers was something like, we let you print the national currency and you give us the money we need to govern the country. The problem with such a system is that those anonymous bankers can easily increase their power by controlling the most prominent politicians of a country with the money they get by manipulating the currency. Once, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the bankers who founded the Rothschild family, said, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." It is normally pretty easy to buy politicians. First, most of them come from the middle classes and want to become rich and powerful. Second, most of them don't know anything about the financial world. Third, most of them are lawyers who don't really care about morality. They have been trained to defend as efficiently as possible the criminals who told them in detail how they committed their most horrible crimes. It's worth mentioning that modern politicians no longer steal money directly from the government coffers or by accepting brown envelopes full of money. No, the way they sell themselves nowadays is still immoral but legal. It's very simple. As long as they govern the country, they keep helping their millionaire friends by passing laws that favor them, by signing with them contracts with inflated prices, or by giving them first-hand information on the most secret government's decisions. And it's only after the end of their political career that they get paid by the companies they helped with big fat salaries for sitting once or twice a year on their board of directors. And if an enterprise refuses to pay, they only have to go and tell their friends who stayed in politics to stop helping that company. This is the reason why so many former ministers are wealthy. Now, let's go back to the bankers who print the money we all use. For them, it's very easy to become rich because money in itself has no real value. It's a pure convention. Money has been invented thousands of years ago by people who wanted to trade things as different as shovels, apples, or hours of work by using a neutral, universally accepted material that was valuable, durable, and easy to transport. For a very long time, gold, silver, and copper played that role until their increasing scarcity forced most nations to use purely conventional instrument like paper money. At the beginning of the 21st century, the transition towards totally immaterial money is almost complete, since only 3% of the transactions made in the developed world use coins or paper money. Everything else is paid with checks, credit cards, bank transfers, or something like that. Since our modern money has become immaterial, the private and unelected directors of a central bank can easily reduce the value of everything owned by a population by creating money out of thin air. You understood well, out of thin air. Long gone is the time when everybody could exchange his dollars for something real like gold, silver, or bronze. What the central bank does to control the value of everything in a country is very simple. If there was only one car in an entire economy, and if the central bank had printed $100, that car would be worth $100. If $1,000 had been printed, that car would be worth $1,000. And if $1 million had been printed, that car would be worth $1 million. How does a central bank inject new money in an economy? For instance, it can buy the bonds emitted by the government in exchange for some sheets of paper signed by the Minister of Finance. The central banks gives him billions of dollars it created on its computers, billions of dollars that the government can use to pay its civil servants. In other words, a new money made out of thin air suddenly appears on the market, despite the fact that the quantity of goods in the country didn't increase. Same quantity of goods, more money. Prices go up and everybody loses. Contrary to what most people believe, inflation, at least in a normal situation, is not the product of bad weather or something like that. It is the product of discussions between private, unelected bankers who sat around the table to decide if this year the inflation rate would be 2, 5, or 10%. In other words, they decide among themselves how much money they're going to steal from us all. It may surprise you, but it's not only the central bank of a country that creates money out of thin air, but all the banks. Most people believe that when they borrow money from a bank, they are giving somebody else money. It's not true. What a bank manager does when you ask for money is something completely different. He simply writes 2 documents. The first one, he writes, for example, that you owe $10,000 to the bank at a 10% annual interest rate. And on the second document, he writes that the bank owes $10,000. From an accounting point of view, everything is regular, since the sum of the 2 debts is equal to 0. The problem is that nobody lent that $10,000 to the bank. There is no deposit behind it. The bank simply created that money out of thin air. And when you repay your debt, the amounts written on the 2 documents decreases simultaneously until disappearing altogether. The brilliant trick here is that the bank has been paid a 10% interest rate on money that didn't exist when you entered into the bank. Even better, that 10% interest rate has been decided by other bankers in the central bank. By the way, you can always verify what I say with the internet bibliography I normally put at the end of my videos. Bankers have many other tricks at their disposal to steal your money. For instance, if you let your bank account inactive for many years, they have the legal right to steal the money it contains without even checking if you're dead or not. Something else. The spectacular safes with thick, reinforced steel doors you see in the banks are only there to deceive you, to make you believe your money is well protected. In reality, the bank doesn't keep your money in it. If you ask your bankers for $10,000 cash, he will tell you to come back 2 or 3 working days later because he must order them. Behind the door of the bank safe, there are almost only deposit boxes where people believe their gold is secure, while in fact it is held captive there. It is held captive there because if there is an economic crisis, the bank or the government could decide to keep the safe locked. Of course, the bankers don't want people to know about it because their top priority is to inspire trust. This is why all the banks look prosperous, busy, and austere, while they are all equipped with those spectacular but totally useless safes, and why their employees always had a very conservative look. For bankers, the economic stability of the countries where they operate is of paramount importance because it allows them to steal your money bit by bit but over a very long period of time. For them, the most efficient way to do that is to freeze your money in long-term financial products like registered retirement saving plans, long-term deposits, or registered educational saving plans, where it is normally very difficult and very long to get your money back. If necessary, that mountain of frozen cash could easily be plundered by the banking community, who has the legal right to lower the interest rate they pay you below the inflation rate they imposed on your country. By doing that, they make sure that the purchasing power of your money slowly decreases. There is more. Those billions of frozen dollars are only frozen for their owners. They are not frozen for the bankers who make enormous profits by investing them in the most profitable parts of the world economy. That clever system worked very well for the bankers as long as the world economy remained under control. But it's no longer the case since the crisis of 2008. Originally, that crisis has been triggered by the massive transfer of Western factories and jobs in countries like India or China, where salaries were much lower. Knowing that construction was an industry that couldn't be moved out of USA, the government of George W. Bush decided in 2002 to reduce unemployment by subsidizing the building of millions of new houses. It looked like a good idea, since a policy of low interest rates had already been implemented by the Federal Reserve. With the interest rates barely above zero, even poor people could borrow money and buy houses. Unfortunately, the construction boom that followed couldn't last because too many people had signed mortgage contracts they would be unable to honor if the interest rates were to go up again. Knowing how dangerous were those mortgages, bankers decided to hide them in very complicated financial products they then sold all over the world. And when the interest rates finally went up in USA, millions of poor people were forced to give back their houses to the banks, where losses kept piling up. Rather than letting the banks pay for their mistakes, which would have been normal, governments all over the developed world decided to pay a large part of their debts with hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, your money. In Canada, for example, the federal government gave $114 billion to the banks. The excuse given to the public for that bailout was that the biggest banks were too important economically. They were too big to fail. Apparently, the individual bankers responsible for that mess were also too big to jail, since none of them was put in prison. One of the consequences of that impunity was that most bankers kept using the same fraudulent methods to make money. They also concluded that if there was a new financial crisis, governments would again come to their rescue. In other words, they believed they will keep for themselves their profits and transfer their losses to the taxpayers. The US Federal Reserve also didn't change its behavior. Its directors were so afraid to trigger an economic depression that by the end of 2009 they had already brought back the interest rates to almost 0%. They also kept buying the US government debts by creating more money out of thin air. It became so cheap to borrow money that millions of US consumers increased tremendously their debt load. Speculators also borrowed like crazy to buy actions and bonds. As a result, between 2010 and 2018, the Dow Jones passed from 11,000 to 25,000. Such a growth is clearly unsustainable in a country like USA, where the industrial sector is not growing but shrinking. There are reasons to believe that the computers are largely responsible for the creation of that financial bubble, since nowadays the majority of the transactions on Wall Street are made by high-speed computers who can buy and sell with profits millions and millions of actions per second, which is much faster than what human beings can comprehend or control. It is called high-frequency trading. The financial situation is even worse if we consider what is called derivatives. Derivatives are financial products that allow speculators to bet on the future value of things as diverse as wheat, petroleum, or the American dollar. The fact that in 2015 the total value of all the derivatives in the world was 7 times higher than the world GDP shows that our modern financial markets have lost contact with reality. They look more and more like a gigantic casino. All that to say that it's extremely risky these days to buy stocks if you don't have access to the insider information the Wall Street geniuses buy to those who know before anybody else. For example, the accountants who write the annual reports of large corporations. Contrary to the Wall Street saying, those geniuses don't buy on the rumor and sell on the news. No, they make a lot of money by buying insider information. They only buy stocks they know for certain are undervalued, only to resell them when the good news are made public. It is illegal, you say? Come on, be serious. We're talking about billions of dollars here. If, despite the financial bubble we just described, a lot of people keep investing in the stock exchange casino, it is because most of them don't know what to do with their money in an environment where the interest rates are almost at 0%. When that bubble will burst, those people will get stuck with overvalued actions and they will lose fortunes. And don't make any mistake here. Governments will then be unable to stabilize the situation. They spent so much money since the subprime crisis of 2008. They created such enormous national debts that they would not even be able to pay the interests on those debts if the interest rates were to reach 6 or 7% again. Being aware of it, the politicians in many countries have passed laws that will allow their bankers' friends to rescue themselves during the next financial crisis by stealing the money you put in your bank accounts. That fraud is called bail-ins. To camouflage that fraud, governments have written those laws in language difficult to understand, and they declared that those laws were essential to protect taxpayers' money and all the individual bank accounts. Some even add, the Canadian government, for instance, that each individual bank account would then be protected by the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation up to $100,000. That was a lie, pure and simple. As you can verify with the bibliography at the end of this video, in 2016, the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation had a reserve of only $1.3 billion to protect a total of $696 billion of insured deposits. It is crystal clear, and the government knows it, that the system has been designed to work in a normal situation when there are very few bank failures. If a major crisis was to occur, almost nobody would be reimbursed. The banks would simply take your money. And if it's not enough, they will demand more government help. Since you are the taxpayers, the money that will not come from your left pocket will come from your right pocket. To steal more money from their population, many governments would like to eliminate paper money altogether. It's not only feasible but easy to eliminate cash in a society. Venezuela and India showed it in 2016 when they brutally declared worthless the highest bank notes owned by their citizens. It is only when the economic crisis is imminent that the bankers and the politicians of a country collude to do the following things. First, they tell their friends and families to take their money out of the country as soon as possible. Second, when the rest of the population understands that something is wrong and rushes to the banks to get its money back, they pass a law forbidding to take more than a few dollars per day from a bank account. This is what the Argentinian government did in 2002. Third, the government does what the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in 1933. It prohibits the individual ownership of gold. The reason being that gold, unlike most other assets, tend to keep and even increase its purchasing value during an economic crisis. After they did all that, the government and the bankers only have to wait while inflation reduces to almost nothing the value of the salaries, the pensions, and the long-term financial products where the middle classes were told to invest their money. If a national economy is fundamentally sick and loses every year hundreds of thousands of jobs to more profitable economy, this is the case in North America and in Europe actually, any massive government intervention to jumpstart the economy can only worsen the situation by transforming inflation into hyperinflation. Well, now, since the coming economic crisis is inevitable, what can you do individually to protect yourself and your money? First, don't rush into retirement unless you are certain to be able to keep working after it. Retiring is a good strategy only if you do that to make certain that nobody will take away your right to a pension. Second, get rid of all your debts in order not to lose everything when the interest rates will go up. It is especially true for your credit card debts and your mortgage. However, if you still owe a lot of money on your house, it's probably too late. You will lose it anyway. Third, stay away from the stock exchange and don't trust the financial advisors who make more money if enough of their clients put their nose in that mousetrap at the end of an economic cycle. We are presently at the end of an economic cycle. Fourth, don't leave your money in the banks your government considers too big to fail. Fifth, don't store your valuables in their safe deposit boxes. Sixth, take as much money as you can out of your registered plans, of course, without paying too much taxes on it. Seventh, if you have a lot of money, invest in land, in property, in precious metal, or in anything that is not under the control of the financial markets. Eighth, don't invest too much in bitcoins because nobody knows who really wrote the program. The probability of fraud is pretty high here. If you don't understand something very well, stay away from it. Anyway, you understood the idea. You must store your belongings as far away as possible from the hands of the politicians, the bankers, and the other fraudsters. In such a case, there is a simple rule to follow. If you cannot touch with your finger what belongs to you, it does not really belong to you and somebody will steal it. That's it. If you like what I say in my videos, you should read the book I put on Amazon.ca. As usual, I thank you in advance to subscribe to my channel, to recommend this video and my book to your friends, and to give it the thumbs up. Bye.